February 1st, 1943. Over the scorching deserts of Tunisia, North Africa, Luftwaffe fighter Ace Egon Meyer locked his Messerschmitt Bf 109 onto an American B-17 Flying Fortress. What happened next would shatter everything German pilots thought they knew about aerial combat. A damaged German fighter, spiraling out of control, slammed directly into the B-17's fuselage just behind the radio room. The impact was catastrophic. Metal screamed. The bomber's entire structure convulsed. When the smoke cleared, Meyer couldn't believe what he was seeing. The B-17's fuselage had been sliced nearly in half, 80% severed. The entire tail section was hanging by threads of metal, swaying violently in the 200-mile-per-hour wind stream like a broken pendulum. By every law of aeronautical physics, this aircraft should have disintegrated instantly. The structural loads on that thin, remaining keel beam exceeded 2,400 pounds. The tail was flexing 10 feet up and down with each gust. Meyer watched, jaw dropped, as the crippled bomber maintained altitude. Not falling, not breaking apart, flying. The B-17F All-American, piloted by Lieutenant Kendrick Bragg, would fly another 90 miles back to base on that impossibly damaged airframe. All 10 crew members survived. When German pilots reported the incident, their commanders used one word: unmöglich. Impossible. This wasn't an isolated miracle. Throughout 1943 to 1945, Luftwaffe combat reports documented hundreds of B-17s returning to base with damage that should have been fatal. Wings half missing, tail sections hanging by cables, entire nose sections blown away. Official German after-action reports repeatedly used words like unglaublich, unbelievable, expressing sheer frustration at the Flying Fortress's refusal to die. German pilots flying sleek aircraft built for speed and agility faced something they'd never encountered: an American bomber engineered not to be efficient, but to be indestructible. But how did Boeing engineers create this flying tank that rewrote the rules of aerial warfare? By 1943, the Luftwaffe had crushed every opponent it faced. For years of unbroken aerial dominance had created a fighter force that seemed invincible. From the burning skies over Britain to the frozen hell of the Eastern Front, German pilots had rewritten the record books with kill ratios that defied belief. Werner Mulder's 101 confirmed victories before his death in 41. Adolf Galland, 104 kills and still flying. On the Eastern Front, aces like Erich Hartmann were accumulating scores that would eventually reach 352 victories. These weren't just numbers. They represented thousands of Allied pilots who never came home. The Luftwaffe wasn't just winning. They were dominating. German fighter doctrine, meticulously documented in Luftwaffe training manuals, had perfected the science of aerial destruction. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf FW 190 embodied this philosophy. Lightweight, lightning-fast, and armed with devastating 20mm cannons and 30mm autocannons that could shred aircraft like tissue paper. Speed, maneuverability, concentrated firepower. This trinity had proven unstoppable. The numbers told a brutal story. RAF Bomber Command's daylight operations from 39 through 41 had been massacred. Wellington bombers, Hamptons, early American B-24s, all had faced the Luftwaffe buzzsaw and bled out catastrophically. Some missions suffered 20 to 30% losses. German after-action reports documented bomber after bomber exploding midair, wings folding under cannon fire, aircraft plummeting earthward trailing flames after mere seconds of engagement. Luftwaffe pilots called early bombing raids Abschussfest, shooting parties. Intercepted communications dripped with contempt. German Fighter Command believed air superiority was permanent, guaranteed by superior aircraft design and pilot training. That averaged over 400 hours compared to Allied pilots' 320. When intelligence reports first mentioned the American B-17, Luftwaffe analysts dismissed it with barely concealed arrogance. Captured assessment documents from 42 concluded another heavy bomber vulnerable to concentrated fighter attack. Yes, the Fortress had defensive guns, but the assessment stated flatly, no bomber can withstand sustained 20mm cannon fire from multiple angles. German aeronautical engineers laughed at American overbuilding. Their design philosophy worshipped efficiency, light, fast, lethal. Luftwaffe technical reports from 42 sneered that American obsession with structural redundancy produces slow, ungainly aircraft sacrificing performance for unnecessary survivability. Unnecessary. That single word captured German confidence perfectly. But as B-17s began appearing over occupied Europe in late 42, those supremely confident Luftwaffe pilots were about to learn a devastating lesson. Sometimes the slow, ungainly, inefficient design is exactly what wins wars. The math was brutal and everyone knew it. August 1942. The 8th Air Force arrived in England with fewer than 200 operational bombers. Facing them, over 2,800 Luftwaffe aircraft defending Fortress Europe. The numerical disadvantage wasn't just daunting, it was potentially suicidal. British commanders had learned this lesson in blood. RAF Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, whose bomber crews had been slaughtered during daylight operations in 1940-41, didn't mince words when Americans announced their daylight precision bombing strategy. Declassified communications show Harris bluntly told American commanders, "Daylight precision bombing is tactically impossible and strategically unsound." The British had abandoned daylight raids after losing 176 bombers in just 3 months. The message was clear: daytime bombing meant death. American challenges went beyond numbers. Army Air Force's logistics reports painted a grim picture. Long-range fighter escorts? The P-47 Thunderbolts couldn't fly deep enough into Germany. Crew training? American pilots averaged 320 hours versus Luftwaffe veterans 400+. Parts and maintenance? Chronic shortages kept 30 to 40% of bombers grounded at any given time. The American press sensed the odds. The New York Times reported on October 14, 42, Army Air Force faces daunting odds in European theater. Life magazine questioned whether American bombers can survive German fighter defenses that have decimated British bomber command. Public confidence wavered. The tactical reality was even grimmer. Mission reports from early 43 documented the nightmare. B-17s lumbered at 180 miles per hour, while Bf-109 screamed past at 350+. Crews operated at 25,000 feet in -50-degree temperatures, oxygen masks freezing to faces, on 6 to 8 hour missions that pushed human endurance to breaking points. The statistics were coldly mathematical. Early loss rates hit 5 to 7% per mission. 25 missions per tour. Do the math. Crews faced less than 30% chance of survival. 1 in 3 might make it. 2 wouldn't. Even Allied combined chiefs of staff expressed grave concerns about viability of American daylight bombing strategy in a January 43 assessment, suggesting American bombers lack survivability necessary for sustained operations against determined fighter opposition. Every indicator pointed toward catastrophic failure. But deep inside Boeing's Seattle plant, American engineers had already solved a problem nobody else even understood existed. While Luftwaffe engineers celebrated lightweight efficiency, Boeing's Seattle plant was building something the world had never seen: an aircraft designed to be nearly impossible to destroy. The revolution began in 1934 when chief engineer Edward Curtis Wells and structural designer Wellwood Beale rejected every conventional design principle. They called their approach fail-safe redundancy. Every critical structure had backups that could carry full loads if primaries failed. This wasn't efficiency. This was obsessive survivability engineering. Start with the wings. Conventional aircraft used two main spars. The B-17, four massive spars, each capable of carrying 60% of total wing loads independently. Boeing's stress analysis documents prove the wing could withstand loads 150% greater than normal flight operations. Translation: lose half your wing structure, keep flying. German engineers would have called this wasteful. American engineers called it bringing our boys home. The fuselage design was equally revolutionary. While German bombers used monocoque construction, lightweight skin bearing structural loads, Boeing employed semi-monocoque with heavy internal frameworks. Engineering specifications show fuselage frames spaced every 14 inches versus 20 to 24 inches in German aircraft. Boeing engineers termed this a damage containment grid. Cannon shells could shred one section, but adjacent frames prevented catastrophic failure propagation. The structure isolated damage rather than allowing it to cascade. Materials science provided another edge. Boeing production documents revealed the B-17 used 24ST alclad aluminum alloy, 40% stronger than standard aircraft aluminum with superior damage tolerance. Metallurgical testing proved this alloy bent and deformed rather than shattering. Battle damage created holes, not structural disintegration. Control systems featured triple redundancy, unmatched anywhere. Technical manuals document primary cable controls, backup cables routed through different fuselage sections, and manual reversion capability. Hydraulics fail? Cables severed? Pilots could still fly through direct mechanical linkages. No German aircraft possessed anything comparable. Boeing's testing philosophy bordered on destructive obsession. Test reports from 1937 show engineers deliberately destroying prototypes. Wings bent until breaking at 3.5 times normal loads, fuselages pressurized to rupture, tail sections twisted beyond design limits. Every failure was analyzed, every weakness reinforced. One Boeing engineer's notes captured the philosophy perfectly. We're not building an efficient aircraft, we're building a flying tank that can bring our boys home. American industrial capacity made this possible. While German factories rationed aluminum and emphasized weight savings, American plants added over 2,000 pounds of unnecessary structure without penalty. German engineers dismissed this as inefficient overbuilding. They were right about the inefficiency. They were catastrophically wrong about everything else. Edward Wells' 1936 internal memo stated the design goal explicitly: survivability over performance. Our aircrews must have confidence their aircraft will absorb punishment and bring them home. Speed and agility matter less than structural integrity and redundancy. As B-17s arrived in England throughout 1943, Luftwaffe pilots prepared to demonstrate their superiority, completely unaware they were about to face the most damage-resistant aircraft ever built. August 17, 1942. 12 B-17Es climbed to 23,000 feet over occupied France, targeting the Rouen-Sotteville marshalling yards. The 8th Air Force's first heavy bomber mission. Mission logs recorded moderate accuracy and light opposition. All 12 fortresses returned safely. The Americans celebrated. The Luftwaffe learned. Captured German tactical directives from September 42 reveal how quickly the enemy adapted. Luftwaffe Fighter Command implemented Schwerpunkt, concentrated force tactics, specifically designed to destroy B-17 formations. Orders were explicit: attack in coordinated waves of 4 to 6 aircraft simultaneously. Focus 20mm and 30mm cannon fire on engines and cockpits. Objective: immediate kills. The escalation came fast and brutal. October 42, the first B-17 went down. Luftwaffe resistance intensified with every mission. December 42, raids into occupied France encountered 20 to 30 German fighters per mission. January 43, the 8th Air Force launched its first deep penetration raids into Germany itself. Mission reports documented opposition as fierce and sustained. February 43, the Wilhelmshaven raid faced over 100 German fighters. Luftwaffe intelligence assessments from January 43 dripped with confidence. Reports identified B-17 defensive formations as vulnerable to head-on attacks from 12 o'clock high position. German analysts predicted sustained losses will force Americans to abandon daylight operations within 6 months. Fighter units reported soaring morale and absolute confidence they could bleed the American bomber force dry. Mission planning documents for February 43 North African support operations, including the mission where all American would be catastrophically damaged, show 8th Air Force commanders knew exactly what their crews faced. Pre-mission briefings warned: expect maximum enemy fighter opposition. The emphasis on formation integrity for mutual defensive fire revealed the desperation. Stay together or die alone. Crew diaries and letters from this period document mounting terror. One pilot wrote, "Every mission we watch bombers going down. The Germans are good and they're determined. We're taking losses we can't sustain." Another crewman's letter home. "We trust the fort to get us home, but nobody knows if that trust is justified until you're shot to pieces and still flying." The statistics were merciless. 8th Air Force summaries from early 43 recorded 4.2% average loss rate per mission. 25 missions per tour. The math was simple and brutal. Statistically, crews faced near-certain loss or injury before completing their tours. The numbers suggested German tactics were working. The American bomber offensive faced existential crisis. Then, in the skies over Tunisia and contested European airspace, Luftwaffe pilots began experiencing something that would shatter every tactical assumption they held. 11:47 hours. February 1st, 1943. 20,000 feet over Tunis. B-17F, All-American, serial number 41-24406, held tight formation with the 97th Bomb Group. Lieutenant Kendrick Bragg, Jr. flew steady, scanning for German fighters. Then a damaged Messerschmitt Bf-109, spinning out of control, slammed directly into the fortress's fuselage just behind the radio room. The impact was cataclysmic. Crew accounts described the moment. Tremendous crashing sound. The aircraft shuddered violently. Looking back, we could see daylight through a massive gash in the fuselage. The entire tail section was hanging by what looked like a few structural members. The tail was oscillating up and down in the windstream, flexing at least 10 to 12 feet. The engineer's assessment was even grimmer. Fuselage severed approximately 80%, leaving only bottom keel structure and maybe one spar connecting us. Boeing's post-mission engineering analysis would later calculate something that defied physics. All-American was flying with less than 20% of intended structural strength connecting fore and aft sections. That thin lower keel beam and possibly one frame member were sustaining loads equivalent to the entire tail, assembly approximately 2,400 pounds, while experiencing aerodynamic flutter forces exceeding 5 gs. Every structural engineer who examined the data reached the same conclusion. Immediate catastrophic structural failure should have been inevitable. Lieutenant Bragg's official statement captured the nightmare. Aircraft was barely controllable. Every control input required maximum force. We were essentially flying two separate aircraft sections that happened to still be connected, reduce speed to absolute minimum, about 135 miles per hour, to decrease aerodynamic loads on damaged structure. Crew moved forward to shift center of gravity away from damaged section. Mission logs document the impossible 68-minute flight back to the nearest Allied airfield. Over 90 miles on a structure that shouldn't have held together for 90 seconds. The crew prepared for bailout 3 times when tail oscillations increased, but Boeing's redundant structure held. All 10 crew members survived the emergency landing. All-American wasn't unique. Army Air Forces Evaluation Board Document 44-12 cataloged the pattern. B-17G patches from the 91st Bomb Group returned with a 7-foot section of right wing, completely missing and landed successfully. B-17F Hell's Angels from the 303rd survived 48 missions, accumulating over 1,000 flak holes, multiple wing spar damage, and a tail section riddled with 20mm cannon holes. B-17G Abit Alice returned with its entire nose section blown off, navigator and bombardier positions completely destroyed, pilot flying with rudder and throttles only. Post-war interrogation reports captured German pilot disbelief. Major Heinrich Erler, 208 victories, stated, "I watched my cannon shells exploding along a fortress wing spar. By all engineering logic, the wings should separate. The bomber continued formation flying. I had to break off to reload, and when I returned, the same bomber was still holding position." Oberst Egon Mayer reported, "We began calling them Die Fliegen Festung not with respect but with frustration. They absorbed damage that would obliterate 3 Bf-109s. By March 1943, captured Luftwaffe Tactical Directive JG-2 admitted defeat. B-17 attacks require concentrated fire on single-point engines or cockpit only. Dispersed damage across airframe proves ineffective. The numbers told the story. 38% of returning B-17s carried Category damage, major structural damage requiring depot-level repair. Yet return rates remained 95 to 96%. As one maintenance chief noted, "We'd see forts come back looking like flying scrap heaps, count 200-plus holes, see main spars cracked, and somehow they landed with all crew alive." By mid-1943, Luftwaffe combat reports began reading like chronicles of disbelief. JG-26 mission log, July 43. Attacked B-17 formation for 45 minutes. Observed multiple direct hits on lead bomber. Engines smoking, visible structural damage to wings. Bomber maintained formation and completed bomb run. This cannot continue. Our pilots expend all ammunition with insufficient results. Allied interrogation reports captured the psychological devastation. Captured Luftwaffe pilots described watching their training doctrine collapse in real time. One stated, "We were trained that concentrated 20mm fire would destroy any bomber. The B-17 proved this training wrong. You watch your rounds hit, see pieces flying off, and the verdammt thing keeps flying. It destroys morale." Another pilot's testimony was even more damning. "We began calling missions against B-17 self-murder. You had to close to dangerous range, expose yourself to defensive fire, and even then might not bring one down. German high command faced the mathematics of failure." An August 1943 OKW document marked "Secret admitted." American B-17 bomber demonstrates unexpected survivability characteristics that undermine previous attrition estimates. Projected American bomber losses of 20 to 30% per deep penetration mission have not materialized. Actual losses 4 to 7% indicate American bomber offensive is sustainable. Luftwaffe Fighter Command must revise tactics. The logistics crisis was equally devastating. Luftwaffe supply reports from late 43 documented 300% increase in ammunition consumption per bomber destroyed compared to 1940 to 41 British bomber kills. German armaments analysis noted. Fighter units report requiring 15 to 20 cannon strikes to ensure B-17 destruction versus 3 to 5 strikes for British Halifax or Wellington. This ammunition consumption rate is logistically unsustainable. Desperation produced the unthinkable. November 43. Luftwaffe Command authorized the Sonderkommando Elba concept, ramming tactics where German fighters would deliberately collide with B-17s. One German pilot's diary captured the implications. That they ask us to ram shows they have no other answer to the fortress. Elite units crumbled psychologically. JG-2 Richthofen Squadron War Diary, December 43. Pilots increasingly demoralized by B-17 resilience. Expertin with 50+. Victories report B-17 as most difficult target faced. One pilot required 3 separate attacks, expending all ammunition to down single bomber. Contrast with Eastern Front, where single pass, often sufficient for kill. The January 1944 Luftwaffe Strategic Assessment admitted total defeat. American bomber offensive cannot be stopped through attrition. B-17 survivability, combined with American production capacity, 300+ bombers monthly, creates mathematically unsolvable defensive problem. We destroy 40 to 50 bombers per month. They add 300. Our fighter pilot losses, 15 to 20 monthly, are irreplaceable. The B-17's structural resilience had achieved something strategic bombing theorists never anticipated: breaking enemy morale through sheer indestructibility. The B-17's survivability didn't just win battles. It rewrote strategic warfare. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey's 1945 post-war analysis stated it explicitly. B-17 survivability proved decisive factor enabling sustained daylight precision bombing campaign. Loss rates of 4 to 6% allowed force regeneration and expansion. Had losses reached projected German estimates of 20 to 30%, daylight bombing operations would have been unsustainable by October 1943. Allied command reversed course completely. A September 1943 Combined Chiefs of Staff directive declared, B-17 performance exceeds all expectations. Authorize expansion of 8th Air Force to 2,000+ bomber strength. Structural resilience allows prosecution of daylight strategic campaign previously deemed impossible. The same commanders who'd questioned American strategy 6 months earlier now bet everything on it. Germany faced catastrophic resource allocation crisis. War production documents show the Luftwaffe was forced to redirect 70% of fighter production to Western Front defense by mid-1944, stripping the Eastern Front of air superiority. Albert Speer's Armaments Ministry reported, B-17 resilience requires numerical fighter superiority of 3 to 1 for acceptable attrition ratios. This fighter concentration prevents support of ground forces and creates multi-front crisis. The operational impact was devastating for Germany. 8th Air Force analysis documented 291 missions against German industry from 43 through 45, including 172 missions to heavily defended targets previously considered unsurvivable. B-17 structural resilience enabled bombing of Schweinfurt's ball bearing plants, synthetic oil facilities, and Regensburg aircraft factories despite 40 to 60% bomber damage rates per mission. Crew psychology shifted dramatically. An 8th Air Force psychiatric evaluation from January 44 noted, B-17 structural resilience significantly impacts crew combat effectiveness. Aircrews report confidence in aircraft survivability, reduces combat stress casualties by estimated 30 to 40%. Knowledge that aircraft can take it and keep flying maintains crew effectiveness even after witnessing severe battle damage. German production statistics tell the resource drain story. 1942, 5,500 fighters produced. 1943, 10,900. 1944, 25,800. This desperate production increased diverted critical resources from tanks, submarines, ground equipment. Economic historians assess this forced allocation reduced Wehrmacht ground capabilities by 20 to 25%. American media validated the investment. Life magazine, August 43. Flying Fortress lives up to name, bomber brings boys home despite devastating damage. These stories, backed by dramatic damage photographs, justified the $3 billion investment in 12,731 B-17s. D-Day planning documents cite B-17 survivability as a critical enabling factor for pre-invasion bombing campaigns. The Supreme Allied Commander's assessment: only B-17 structural resilience allows sustained bombing campaign that will degrade German defenses sufficiently for amphibious assault success. But military historians document the B-17's impact extended far beyond immediate victories. The B-17 Flying Fortress didn't just win World War II. It rewrote the rules of military aviation forever. Air Force Historical Foundation analysis identified the paradigm shift. B-17 survivability represented paradigm shift in strategic air power doctrine. Pre-war theories assumed bomber losses of 15 to 20% per mission would render strategic bombing unviable. B-17's 4 to 6% loss rate proved strategic bombing could achieve decisive results if aircraft possessed sufficient structural resilience. This lesson shaped all subsequent heavy bomber design. The engineering legacy runs deep. A 1989 Society of Automotive Engineers historical paper documented the transformation. Boeing's B-17 design philosophy, sacrificing performance for survivability through structural redundancy, became dominant military aircraft design paradigm post-World War II. Every subsequent military aircraft from B-52 to A-10 Warthog incorporated fail-safe redundancy concepts pioneered on B-17. Commercial aviation safety standards requiring multiple backup systems trace directly to B-17 engineering principles. Military doctrine evolved around B-17 lessons. Air University's curriculum on strategic bombing evolution cites the Fortress as proof of concept that strategic air power could achieve decisive independent results if platforms possessed three characteristics: payload capacity, defensive armament, and most critically structural survivability. These three factors became foundation of post-war strategic air command doctrine. The National Museum of the U.S. Air Force's historical assessment captures the philosophical divide. B-17 combat record demonstrates American industrial philosophy divergence from European design thinking. While German and British aircraft emphasize performance efficiency, speed, maneuverability, payload optimization, American engineering prioritized bring the crew home survivability. This philosophical difference proved decisive. German Me-262 jets were faster, British Lancasters carried heavier payloads, but neither could sustain losses and continue operations like B-17 formations. Cold War development traced direct lineage. Strategic Air Command documents show Boeing's 1948 B-52 development explicitly referenced B-17 survivability lessons learned, redundant control systems, damage-tolerant structure, crew protection prioritization. The B-52's chief designer stated, "We're building the B-17's grandson, same philosophy, modern technology." Culturally, the B-17 became America's symbol. Library of Congress archives document it as most recognized American military aircraft symbol of World War II, appearing in 127 wartime documentaries and 43 Hollywood films. Its reputation for bringing boys home symbolized American industrial superiority. Even German post-war analysis admitted defeat. A 1946 captured Luftwaffe General Staff report concluded B-17 survivability represented American industrial warfare doctrine at its most effective. While individual German aircraft demonstrated superior performance characteristics, American ability to produce aircraft that could sustain 30 to 40% battle damage and return to combat within days created insurmountable numerical and psychological advantage. We learned too late that destroying B-17s required resources we could not sustain. The statistics tell the story. 12,731 B-17s produced, 4,735 lost in combat, 37% total war loss rate, but 95% plus individual mission survival, 291,508 sorties, 640,000 tons of bombs delivered. Compare this to British Lancasters, 156,000 sorties, but 44% total loss rate. Survivability enabled operational tempo impossible with fragile designs. The U.S. Air Force Academy curriculum devotes entire modules to the B-17 lesson. Superior individual aircraft performance matters less than platform survivability enabling sustained operations. B-17 proved slower, less efficient aircraft with superior survivability defeats faster, more efficient aircraft with vulnerability. The Flying Fortress's incredible resilience perfectly demonstrates the American approach to military engineering, an approach that would define warfare for generations. The B-17 Flying Fortress proved something revolutionary. American military engineering philosophy, survivability over performance, crew protection over efficiency, redundancy over optimization, could achieve strategic victory where tactical elegance failed. Luftwaffe pilots flew superior performing aircraft, but couldn't sustain campaigns against bombers engineered simply to survive. From February 1943's All-American flying home with 80% fuselage severance to countless fortresses returning with catastrophic damage, German pilots witnessed something that defied their training. Official Luftwaffe reports used words like impossible, unbelievable, inexplicable, not because they lacked skill, but because they faced an engineering philosophy they couldn't comprehend. The numbers tell the complete story. 12,731 B-17s produced, 291,508 combat sorties flown, 640,000 tons of bombs delivered, 4 to 6% average loss rate that made strategic bombing sustainable, and most importantly, thousands of American aircrew who survived catastrophic battle damage because Boeing engineers built an aircraft prioritizing bringing them home over every other consideration. This wasn't just about one aircraft. The B-17 represented American industrial warfare at its finest, the willingness to overbuild, add redundancy, sacrifice performance for survivability, prioritize servicemen's lives above engineering efficiency. This philosophy defined American military technology through the Cold War and beyond. The A-10 Warthog's redundant systems, The Black Hawk helicopter's crashworthy structure. Lieutenant Kendrick Bragg, Jr., pilot of All-American, captured it perfectly. The Boeing engineers who designed that aircraft saved my life and my crew's lives. They never met us, but they built that airplane thinking about us. That's American engineering. This story matters because it reveals how engineering philosophy determines strategic outcomes, how decisions in Seattle factories shaped European skies, how structural redundancy defeated tactical brilliance, how bringing boys home became a winning strategy. If this incredible story amazed you, subscribe for more documented World War II battles and innovations. Hit like if you learned why Luftwaffe aces couldn't believe their eyes. Comment, what other World War II engineering marvels should we investigate? Next time, how American factory workers built an entire invasion fleet in secret, right under Nazi reconnaissance, deception, and industrial genius that blindsided German high command, military history proves. Never underestimate American engineering ingenuity, industrial determination, and the willingness to build something inefficient that brings our people home alive. The Flying Fortress earned its name in European skies, and Luftwaffe aces learned the hard way that some aircraft are simply too tough to kill